4 Dead was a smash hit on release, and the future of the franchise was up in the green flute-filled air. What would be next for the dynamic zombie shooter? Valve had tons of ideas for DLC for Left 4 Dead, but plans changed rapidly during development. Behind the scenes, there was so much content that Valve wanted to add to Left 4 Dead. Only problem was with what they wanted to bring to light, and just couldn't work with how Left 4 Dead was made. The coding, problems, and more would just make everything so much harder to implement into the base game and cause problems down the road that a sequel was unanimously decided behind the scenes by Valve to release exactly 1 year after the first. There were a lot of ideas, elements, and concepts that were either tweaked, completely altered, or even left alone at the grocery store while mom went to wire $200 to a Nigerian prince. Bridging the gap between 1 and 2, let's see what was devised, conceptualized, and euthanized in a little under a year. Today, we are exploring everything that would or could have been with the second installment. These are the original plans for Left 4 Dead 2.
Baby, they're gonna wish we had.
I know, sweetie, I know. The first thing you see when buying a game, turning it on, or getting to the title screen is, well, the title. And with that is what would have been the funniest tidbit in this video. The sequel was originally not going to be called Left 4 Dead 2, but instead referred to by some devs as Back 4 More. I get what you're thinking, and I can get what they were going for at the time, mostly trying to keep in line with the 4 motif and a sequel. Honestly, didn't feel like a title for a successor, a direct one, and why a 2 was slapped on instead. That specific title was not forgotten though, as people at Turtle Rock that worked on Left 4 Dead 2 would carry the will of the back prefix on their backs when making Back 4 Blood over a decade later. Now Valve sought to making the dynamic of the next cast of survivors feel more organic, to make them feel like realer people that were forced together by circumstances more so than the first cast of Zoe, Bill, Lewis, and Francis. While the OG group were all basically heavily altered over time, even down to their in-game models, the second group had less revisions and final results, but much more changes in other areas. The Left 4 Dead 2 survivors experienced growing pains while being realized into their final designs. Again, not as much as the first group, but interesting nonetheless. It's very interesting to note that we did have a concept art of a group of survivors that looked both vaguely and shockingly similar to our second group. Posted by the dev team to the official Left 4 Dead blog in 2013 was this sketch, dating all the way back to 2005, predating even sketches of the Left 4 Dead 1 survivors. From left to right, it's obvious who is who and how much things had changed from 2005 to early to mid 2009. Coach more than likely a direct homage to Sergeant Kenneth Hall from 2004's Dawn of the Dead. Shotgun in hand, same cheekbone structure, similar attire, minus the ravishing mustache and, being more physically fit. Nick's spiritual concept art looking like Bruce Willis out of Die Hard, just a bit more tatted up. I feel like that full arm sleeve of ink carried on into Francis's design, with his little cig being popped into the mouth of Bill. Rochelle is near identical to her release look. I had a hard time figuring it out, but after looking into black female leads of the 80s and 90s, I landed on Kimberly Ellis, specifically in her role in 1996's Set It Off, where she played a mom that joins a bank heist to get her kids out of poverty. Ellis's character, being the only survivor with no real visual or physical connection to their final design, is blatantly based on the character William Foster from 1993's Falling Down. Like 1-to-1, maybe a bit more rugged and buffer, but that is Foster hands down, even to the 2 pins in his pocket protector and his movie poster shotgun. I wholeheartedly believe that this overall character design was repurposed into Back 4 Blood's Hoffman. Now, if I was a betting man, I would assume that all 4 of these sketches here were just placeholders referencing badasses with guns throughout movie history. Beyond those drawings that serve more as the idea of a group of 4 badasses, what changed about the core tenets of each of the sequel's cast of ragtag people? Well, the first of which being the overtime de facto leader and one-man cheeseburger apocalypse himself, Coach. Probably the most consistent survivor of the new batch, having always been conceived as a large, stout black dude with a background in leading others. Coach was originally supposed to be even fatter, though.
You tend not to see really big, heavy characters in games because it's hard to animate and do things. Even Coach is slimmed down from what I originally envisioned him.
But due to both the strain on animations to make something more jiggly and the realism of fat people running around from fast-moving infected means that he had to be thinned down just a wee bit. But we all know the real reason. It was because if he got any bigger, that his sheer godliness would have wiped out the green flu pandemic in less than 12 hours. It's straight facts. But what was the most different about him as a character in the early days was mostly just what he chose to wear. One piece of concept art showed him donning a football helmet, wearing a whistle around his neck, trying to be in your face or on your face with his football connections. That and wielding a compound bow, but the stuff about that we'll get into later when discussing weapons. His clothing was also slightly different, having slightly different color schemes and embroidered insignias, seen here in white and blue with a big red S. Then Coach would land closer to his final design when Left 4 Dead 2 was teased at E3 2009, but with a little blue shirt and ML on his top before becoming the purple yellow menace, repping FHS on his shirt. Now we got our boy Ellis. He was also not one to see the point in changing what was largely a good thing going. Although in the beginning, Eric Lading had not originally been the voice actor behind our favorite redneck. The original glory would have gone to Nathan Vetterline, the voice of Team Fortress 2's arrogant New Yorker, the Scout. Can you imagine how that would have sounded?
Next time eat a salad. Yo, if you didn't want me to kill you, you should have said something. Eat it, you mute frickin' moron.
But due to Left 4 Dead 2 taking place in the American South, and with Ellis coming from that area, having a voice more connected to a Brooklyn accent for him would have seemed very out of place. Valve would turn down Nathan seeking a more appropriate Southern accent. Funnily enough, just like Coach, Ellis had a slight color palette swap to his shirt, originally being a white and blue design rather than the shirt that would become an Xbox 360 avatar item that we can never get again, the Bull Shifter shirt. Seen in the E3 2009 teaser here, this cosmetic of Ellis must have stayed late into development, as in the Parish poster, Ellis's original top didn't quite yet get dropped, and has stayed on the Parish's poster ever since.
Nick.
Then we got Nick, who might seem like somewhat of a jackass most of the time. Snarky, abrasive, and sarcastic, to say the least. But what if I said he was a jackass? Like the face of Jackass. Literally, lead developer Chet Falasek stated during the development of Nick's character design and backstory that a certain person from the famous TV show was used to really get a grasp of where they were wanting to go with Nick.
There'll be a bunch of these sketches, and then they'll have the little bio with them maybe, and we'll start talking about these characters, and often the shorthand we use is the heads are famous people, and that's the way to kind of short circuit and go, it's this kind of character. So Nick was originally Johnny Knoxville, and then eventually we took him off because he really wasn't quite that kind of troublemaker.
Johnny Knoxville being a very temporary placeholder as the kind of jackass they were looking for meant more of a dick. So less jackass, more dick ass. While this was recently brought to life by the lead developer, it's been well known since Left 4 Dead 2's release that Nick wasn't always just a con man with an expensive suit. Stated in the developer commentary,
the writers originally devised a biography for a convict character. There was an idea that here in the lawless world of the infected, this escaped convict, sick of wearing prison clothes, had taken the effort to loot a very expensive white suit from an abandoned clothing store. He might as well survive the apocalypse in style. This concept gradually evolved into the riverboat gambler.
While the overlap of convict to con man can have a wide margin of difference, some of his character dialogue still insinuates a life of crime and violence. But he wasn't always going to be a criminal mastermind, or at least a dick that liked to do illegal shit. Both Nick and Ellis could have also had their backstories be something completely different as well, with what was described as a fireman being a playable character in the game, to give some weight to why at least one of the survivors would know how to expertly use those fire axes that players can now pick up for melee attacks, considering the newness of the mechanic and why sidearms and melees were all that were available in the first half of Dead Center Chapter 1. It would also explain why a firefighter would be there, since, there was a fire that was slowly but surely spreading across the Vanna Hotel. But the idea of a firefighter survivor would quickly be shelved by Valve for the sake of the survivors' dynamics. Chet Falasek would go on to say how a concept artist really wanted to implement one of this profession.
He really wanted a fireman. I don't know why. And he just did like a whole bunch of things of firemen. But my thing is like, if you have a character who is a authority, people are going to bow down to that authority just at some point because they're the expert or they have the opinion. And so I don't like to have that in there.
Take note of that, what he said, that it was not being interesting. Development of the main cast wanted there to be strictly an interesting chemistry between all four main people. So having a fireman with a commanding personality may have been less impactful to what we know today. More so to focus on four more civilian-like people navigating the zombie apocalypse for the wider audience. And then we got our girl Ro. On the subject of separate career paths, no one takes the cake on their beta job resume more than her. Before landing her job in canon as an assistant producer for a local news station, Rochelle had worked in the minds of Valve staff as a bartender, a Clevelandite, a singer, and, most interestingly, a DMV worker. Chet Falasek was hell-bent on trying to make Rochelle into a big old DMV worker based purely on interactions he and some of the Valve team had with the female DMV employee in Cleveland, Ohio, saying that having grown up in the big city that...
This is the one I really, really wanted to make. She was going to be from the DMV and from Cleveland. Growing up in Cleveland, the women who worked at the DMV were the most powerful women we knew.
Through the writing phase, though, it was deemed that this character centered around the personality and attitude of a big old DMV employee just wasn't as engaging. Chet said he really wanted to appeal to real-life DMV workers and to be the guy who put a nice DMV employee into a game. On the topic of women Chet knew in Cleveland, he had also been in the process of writing Rochelle close to the personality of one of his ex-girlfriends at Cleveland State University. While he was excited to have this fleshed out, a Valve lawyer quickly stepped in once interactions between the survivors were brought to the table, saying that they were entering troublesome territory if they went forward with this version of Rochelle, saying a more real version of a woman from Cleveland would have been problematic, especially for what the lawyer had been telling Chet in regards to what she was saying to Coach. Whatever that means, you can come to a conclusion yourself. But a true blue Cleveland-oriented Rochelle would never be, although the city would remain her hometown.
I told you. What did I tell you? Didn't I tell you? 'Cause I told you. And when did I tell you? A long time ago. And what did I say will happen when I told you? Exactly what just happened.
Chet also said that very briefly he did explore the idea of her being a singer, listening to the song Bang 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 by Mark Ronson on repeat. He dramatized the female vocals on the song as a survivor for Left 4 Dead 2, thinking her up as a singer from the Bronx. Especially in a game like Left 4 Dead 2, where you're going to be hearing these characters talk a lot with thousands of lines of dialogue. Next on Rochelle's job history was one that was at a bit of a crossroads. As they were finalizing her backstory, they were torn between making her what she is now, an assistant producer for a big TV station, or a surly bartender, carrying over the ideas of a boisterous big old DMV worker with some junk in her trunk. But due to Coach already being set in stone at that point, the idea of a surly or powerful woman next to the large and in charge Coach didn't really pan out for the team's idea. ideas, with development preferring to make characters thinner for previously stated purposes. That and they didn't want to have two bulky characters. So what would be described as a surly bartender or a commanding DMV worker would not have fit well with the skinny Rochelle we know and love. The assistant producer ultimately makes more sense though, to give better reason to why a woman from Cleveland happened to be in Savannah, Georgia when the shit hit the fan, and to give reason to why she would know a good portion of information about the green flu virus and the specific special infected that have been cropping up due to her news gathering background. As she was finally set in stone story-wise, her design still needed some ironing out, having been that of the portly DMV employee looking, well, a bit of a stereotype for black women, but matching the vibe of a boss bitch for a zombie apocalypse. After taking some Ozempic and time traveling to the era of Phallusec's other multiplayer venture, the Anacrysis, Rochelle had a brief concept stint looking like a foxy survivor. But this appearance, just like when she was envisioned to be a singer with a hipster vibe, didn't really fit the environment of where she was going to end up, especially for a setting in the late 2000s. She would eventually land to a near identical final design, yet with a different, more fuller and longer hairstyle and her lack of Depeche Mode support on a yellow shirt. Rochelle, hands down, has probably the most changes to her overall design and story and everything else across the spectrum, more so than all other 7 playable survivors. And that is saying a lot because the Left 4 Dead 1 survivors had a ton of iterations and even completely different models. Despite this, she would still end up having a good chunk of her recorded and even included dialogue cut from the game and only accessible via developer console for over a decade before the community-driven Last Stand update was released. Why these lines were cut is largely unknown. It left her feeling dry and boring compared to the colorful nature of her 3 male counterparts. Now, you could say that it's possible that lawyers may have stepped in similarly, like when Chet was making Rochelle to be like his ex, to not portray Rochelle in particular in a certain way. But that's just a theory. A row theory! The cast of the Carriers may have seen some middling lows and extreme highs in their development. What about the Green Flu Gang's special forces? Well, you'd think with only a year to implement ideas, ton of scrapped content and etchings on them. But oh boy, did Valve go to town on trying to figure out what would work, especially for them. First off, we have everyone's favorite self-love advocate, the Charger. Having been the poster child of new Special Inflicted up to release, being the first shown in a surprise showcase at E3 2009, displaying the sole focus of its development being around the gameplay of ramming into survivors with a cattle-like battle cry, with one part of its body being huge to get the job done. Its concept phase saw a lot of variation in how they wanted it to look, feel, and move. In fact, just like Rochelle, it holds the record in its own group of having the most changes. While the design of the Charger was being hammered out, Valve simply used a recolored Hunter in-game to test out its abilities. Both developers and concept artists working both in tandem and separately to get the Charger finalized. At first, it was nowhere near the singular arm-focused beast we know today, instead looking more like a battering ram with most of the growth in its body being in its torso and its arms being shrunken down, with a cracked open mouth and decayed face that saw some tweaking here and there. But this didn't last too long. Maybe the silhouette of its design was too close to the roundness of the boomer, a key feature in character recognition in fast-paced games like Left 4 Dead and even Overwatch, where making them quickly recognizable not just by design but by shape. Its original method of attacking the survivor synced up more with its original concept art. At first, its main method of attack was simply to charge into survivors, knocking them off their feet that it ran into, but not grabbing them at first, simply running them over. As its gameplay structure was tinkered with, we saw its offensive means coinciding with its body mutations. The emphasis would shift to not just ramming, but slamming. The bloated physique would stay rounded out in its next iteration, but now with the head consumed by its tumor-like body, with its left arm and leg completely swollen. The idea of the beefy swinging arm was slowly evolving, with design notes saying that it gave out a mighty woo when charging in. Maybe something like this. The team was dead set on making the Charger the most zombie-looking special infected yet, while others were more mutated-looking people. Having a gory, innard exposed variant just felt right, and a lot of the Charger's appearance would reflect this. The Charger's arm was now a primary focus of the design team. The turd cocoon of an arm was there, but the face looked like it was stripped right off the tank and slapped on a Fallout 4 ghoul's body. A more zombie-like appearance would stay throughout the next few concept arts, focusing on a bloody implosion from the body's mutations. The Charger's attack philosophy was all about a dominant arm at this point, as at the end of its charge, it would do an overhead slam attack to really give a powerful bam where it would proceed to grab and pummel you. It's most likely easy to see why this was changed, as being able to slam into a group and send them flying with the advent of being able to just run away freely could have been a broken ass time. The concept fed into these designs here, the team really wanting to show how the body was prioritizing one arm and legs at the expense of all other parts of the body, particularly with these two, both showing how the green flu mutations basically peeled the flesh off its face to expose its skull, maybe to make the skull a part of its battering attack with a hardened cranium. Its design was way more bloody and gory, with this second iteration really going hard on the rot and blending of muscles at high cost. Like, good God, look at that gaping maw it had. The chin ripped wide open to blend with the torso, and its left arm left withered and rotten as its other arm looks like it's suffering from gigantism.
Good Lord. Gigantism.
The Charger's dominant arm was of course the focal point here. The other arm is basically useless. The Charger's attack would have another change at this point in time, using this dominant arm to kind of be piercing forward for a targeted assault. Its charge attack, however, would immediately end the moment it hit its first survivor for it to start slamming them. It's easy to see why this was scrapped. It kind of just takes away all the oomph and fun with the Charger, but both the concept of this bloody form and its stopping on a dime were shelved in favor of a more earthy, balanced, and reckless final form. The Charger's final concept art would land on this, looking similar to what we got, yet with a more caved-in head, scrawnier leg, and a way more decayed-looking face with a lot more blood, smoothing its skull more in the final product, and only really having its nose removed with some scabbing over a lot of its frame. An integral part of the special infected are their audio cues and vocalizations. The Charger also saw some variety to its diegetic sound, having a guttural screech that could be heard echoing in the E3 2009 teaser. Here it is, isolated. A bit more porkish sounding in nature and a tad more high-pitched than the Charger's current sound and feel. A swine-like squeal that may be carryover from a scrapped special infected only referred to as the Hell Hog. Similar in nature to how people thought the hunter's growls and yelps were repurposed from the concept of an infected dog. Yet in this case, it is actually real and a possibility since the Hell Hog actually had concept art and was confirmed by the dev staff to have been worked on instead of that infected dog thing that was only spread through word of mouth through the Left 4 Dead community. The Hell Hog was going to be a thing, but they figured, zombie animals, that's really not our thing. The high-pitched tone of the Charger's original sounds was probably pitched down, since both its new counterparts of the Spitter and Jockey were already high-pitched. The sound team wanting to give better depth to the warnings you receive when the special infected were out and about getting ready to rip you to shreds. Just like their silhouettes, the sounds are to make things more discernible, so a deeper makes sense for that purpose. Many people also believe that the Charger is the only special that can actually somewhat speak human-like phrases in the midst of its squealing and grunting. The community has pieced together what they believe are some of these words. Now, Valve did confirm during recording and putting him together that his angry muttering was all non-verbal, and that the more violent squeals and shrieks were a bit confusing to players though, as him constantly making these noises made it hard to discern if he was either idle or preparing to attack. So a more toned down version of this vocalization was made to combat all of the stuff we were hearing, making him a mini-tank capable of insta-kills for over a decade to come while hearing those pig-like squeals toned down.
See you, man.
I'm alive.
Alright, I'll go res you, don't worry.
Yeah, don't jump down here. You can get him.
Now we got our female exclusive special, The Spitter, who went through a lot of transitional phases as there were many concept designs and arts attached to the development of this support special. The first looking less like an infected that's been mutated and more just a zombie version of the farmer's wife in that American Gothic oil painting. Just more Beetlejuice or Tim Burton like in the facial region, especially those eyes. Feeling more so that they just wanted a female special infected with this design, not really taking into account that it should reflect how it's supposed to mutate to coincide with its power, specifically the overproduction of stomach acid. The Spitter would drastically change in its second form, becoming fat, round, and even Asian-like in its appearance with a more relaxed apparel. Basically, kind of like a beta female boomer, focusing on the character's production of highly acidic stomach acid, but just bloating it like the boomer. Easy to see why this didn't make it too far into production, but the girth was passed on in legacy to Jesus fucking Christ, this abomination. Getting closer to the final product, it appears that the acid production of the Spitter in its body would have literally dissolved its arms off and even its clothes, causing the body to look like it's bloating out and melting all at once to look like a giant demon turd, which ironically whoever made this, designed this, wanted to let people know that it's shitting itself constantly because they wrote poopy in a little note written next to its ass. Maybe this version of the Spitter would have had a little brown shit trail following it, just like the Spitter has when she has green acid following it wherever it goes, but imagine the voice lines of the survivors if they were looking up and suddenly they got some Spitter shit in their mouth. It honestly, that probably wouldn't have helped their ratings, and just having an infected that has constant poop being trickled out, that just wouldn't have worked. The Spitter would finally get close to completion with its next mock-up. Dissolved lips, high heels, and pigtails that stood up like antenna. It definitely stood out to be its own special in recognition. Its stomach became bearded up in conjunction with its stomach acid production, but was rapidly scrapped to avoid connections to her looking pregnant and then the implications with that. It was rocky territory that they wanted to avoid. The guys at Valve loved everything else about her, but decided to flatten her out, taming her antenna hair down, making it where it was just pigtails going downwards, sagging her stomach and boobs, and making her eyes sunken in with a more swiveled lower mouth, leaving it wide open to shoot out projectiles, make Hawk-Tuah memes over 10 years later, and working on an office job.
Take a look. Holy shit! Someone put a towel under her or something.
The only thing left for our wet girl was her tramp stamp, in which Chet Falasek had his name put on her lower backside. They removed it to what they said was for equality.
Spitter actually had a tramp stamp for a little bit that was my name. I just bet that was my wife. I was like, what do you say about her?
Are you a hitter for the Spitter?
But actually, Gabe tapped me. I was like, yeah, and I'm like, yeah, I know, we should remove that because it's not cool to call people out. Everybody's equal. Because they are. Like everybody contributed. Everybody on that team was amazing.
Okay, Chet. With her finally done, this would all culminate into her main attack method, which also saw some variance through time. The highly acidic liquid that it would spew out would also go through multiple different color-coded iterations. Instead of just being pure green throughout its pooling phase, it originally went from green to yellow to red, indicating to the player how damaging the spit would be if it were touched during each phase. This was most likely changed for both realism and gameplay purposes. Having the spit remain green both made it feel more grounded in reality instead of rapidly shifting colors, and it also made the hazard of this AoE less predictable. Since the spit scales in damage the longer it's out, not having blatant color indication made it less likely for people to pinpoint what stage of damage scaling it was at. Basically, people would be less likely to try to go through the acid if the spit was always green instead of green, meaning it's okay to blitz through, especially in the hectic gameplay environment of Left 4 Dead. Another feature of the spit would have been the acid sticking to survivors. Yeah, if it hit a survivor, the acid would cling on and cause the residual damage, but something you could not get out of, being a hellishly high scaling 3 to 4 second damage drop that you could not get off of you. Thank God that was dropped. The spitter's death is also known to drop a mini pool of acid, but originally the pool would have operated like the smoker's death cloud, creating an acid mist that would cause minuscule damage to anyone that walked through it. So basically, the smoker's scrapped smoke mechanic. She was also said to have run much faster on her feet since she was so frail with a minuscule 100 health pool. But having the support infected with the highest damage output in the game, being able to run off in the blink of an eye and to dodge gunfire more easily would have been almost game breaking, especially in versus mode. The spitter also walked in a more comical way in line with her pigeon-toed feet, but found that beta testers would mock the way she moved and decided to make her locomotion a bit more straightforward and less janky. Now, before we move on, just quick note, fucking D. Bradley Baker voiced her shrieks. Can you believe that? I mean, listen to what he's done before and then listen to what he sounds like here.
For what? In case we need to intrusimatate vomiting?
There's nothing wrong about wanting to go into the girls' bathroom.
6-7? Actually, my name is Rex, Captain, 501st Clone Battalion.
You can open up the chambers in your throat to make it larger. You can modify the column of air. You can just squinch it up there and in all these just horrific kinds of ways.
We are the jockeys, jockeys are we.
And we got the Jockey. Our maniacally laughing, scoliosis-stricken short king was devised with the idea of taking control away from a survivor by constantly dragging them in a desired direction while they tried to resist his influence while, riding him. Having always had the punny title of a jockey derived from the horse jockey profession, even having a placeholder model apparently that was a common infected in jockey attire while the jockey's design was being worked on. At first, it appeared to look like a very emaciated child zombie that snapped to a survivor's back. Despite it having facial hair and some facial structure that pointed towards it being a full-size man, shrunken down, or even a little person, it's for this reason that this design was probably scrapped pretty early on. As we all know, children in zombie media, it's just a big no-no. Better to avoid controversy of having to kill a kid zombie than to push this design forward. Its appearance was then converted to something more simian-like to match its movement and behavior, gaining a hunchback and charred looking skin and a complete lack of clothes. This burnt Oompa Loompa really not looking like something out of Left 4 Dead. The cracked flesh and monkey-like nature and blood-red eyes feel more akin to something like Resident Evil's diverse pool of enemies. Designs for zombies in Left 4 Dead need to be less about being nightmarish and more of realistic mutations to mindless people having some grounding in reality with how people can change. However, the head and posture were going in the right direction. Its next step was to go way harder in the paint, and I mean the red paint, because they just straight ripped all the skin off the jockey's face and just doused him in blood, leaving him to be a skull jockey more than a special jockey, still naked and burned with bloodier limbs. In this design, it even has the jockey completely binding the survivor's arms rather than clawing at them and obscuring their face, just kind of giving a big hug. Funny how this concept concept art went backwards in progression, both in the style that they were going for and the gameplay mechanics around the final rendition. A separate render was later released by Valve, showing what looked like a three-way infant of the previous 3 Jockey concept arts. You've probably seen this particular one before on the thumbnail of that one GameRanks video from almost 10 years ago, having even less in common with the final product that we got and looking like the charred version of Chucky doing back shots on Ellis. They finally got their shit together with the Jockey when they gave him clothes for the first time and a regular looking human face, just minus the lips and a neck that's fused into the back with yellow eyes instead of red, looking way less bulky and much skinnier than anything before, giving him more diversity in his silhouette. It was finally what Left 4 Dead expected of its special infected and mutations and the powers that followed with that. However, with some degree of change during development for our little guy. The action of the Jockey latching onto you as a survivor had a different perspective during playtesting. While typically when you are hit by a pinning special infected, your perspective shifts to the third person to showcase the carnage your survivor is going through, how that particular zombie is killing you, except the Jockey for a time, with your player-controlled survivor remaining in first person while being jockeyed, having its claws and legs appear on your screen to really drive home how control over you was being taken. Yet the first-person camera for being jockeyed did not last. This was scrapped, most likely due to the awkwardness of it. It would not be consistent with other special infected that pin. That and the Jockey being the only special infected you can resist in any way, shape, or form meant you had these particular visual indicators of where he was wanting to take you and where you were being leaned towards, so you could tilt in the opposite direction to resist his ability, albeit slightly, but it's something. Doing this in first person would have been much more irritating and not in an entertaining way, maybe even nauseating. Not to mention that the Jockey also had the ability to just hop off survivor whenever it wishes instead of until they were downed or the Jockey was shoved off of them. In Versus, this would have been yet another broken ability, and honestly, weird that they tried to attempt this considering they tried the same thing with the Hunter and Smoker during the betas of Left 4 Dead before and saw it was busted there too. But I guess you never know something's broken until you try it out, right? Its rabid cackling was also much more frequent and honestly more horrific, as you can hear here. Pulling the survivor much faster with much less resistance, making it much harder to deal with. Its original movement was also less of the running forward, kind of leaning forward in a hunchback animation than its final creation. The devs really wanted to lean towards its animal-like inspirations, that it apparently ran much more like both a lemur running sideways and a hyena in a four-legged galloping motion.
These fit with his maniacal laughter, but again, needed to be more aggressive. Such movements also would have caused problems maneuvering the character and reading its intentions in-game, especially in Versus mode. They also seemed too much of a mutation from the character's original human state.
It was just less aggressive looking and more comical than anything. I mean, have you seen Crab Jockey? And the fact that these movements thing between him and jumping, it made his actions harder to read for survivors in moment-to-moment gameplay. Since his current run is so reserved with his limbs kind of being retracted into his body that compared to when he jumps, letting all his limbs kind of spring out. So you see the difference there? If he was kind of like running on all fours, it would be harder to tell when he's jumping, and it's just helping the player more than anything. There were also elements to its attack methods that were altered or reverted during development. The Jockey originally had a more arm-extensive animation that it used when pouncing at survivors, seen here, probably having been reduced in its overall frame to make it less easier to shoot with a smaller hitbox. hitbox. This may explain why the Jockey's hitbox for riding a survivor has been bullshit. The game accounts for the model size getting resized according to the survivor size, his hitboxes don't. Combine that with the delay between the animation and the hitboxes and you get jank. Instead of having the Jockey raise its hands above its head while pouncing. During development, there was also the horrible mechanic that if you shot the body of a survivor that was being jockeyed, they would be dealt friendly fire. This was obviously omitted because most of the time you can't help but shoot a survivor in the panic state of Left 4 Dead's gameplay. I'm glad there was no friendly fire when it came to jockeys. The Jockey also had scaling pounce damage, much like the Hunter's Leap, depending on how high you hit a survivor from. But having 2 special infected having the capability to do large amounts of initial damage was probably way too broken. At least with the Hunter, there is some finesse and skill expression to pounce damage, but with the Jockey, it's more just falling onto a survivor from high places more so than not. You don't even have to use your ability, it can just auto latch on, especially since the Jockey requires no wind up to its attack like the Hunter. If there was one thing about the Jockey though, they really had a shit ton of bugs attached to him, being the bane of many players' existence and also having one bug where a simple shove or infected scratch could insta-kill him that somehow remained in the game for close to 11 years on PC. With the core cast of new Special Infected, there were also changes to previous specials and additions of Uncommon Infected into the fray. So let's go over those previous specials and anything that was scrapped, cut, or retooled about them in their migration to the Land of Two. While the Witch did see her inclusion of the Day-Walking Wandering variant, not really anything about her shift to the sequel was held back. Likewise with her jock boyfriend the Tank, although it's neat to note that in censored regions like Germany and Australia where animations of infected directly on fire were removed due to violence displays, except for the Tank. He was omitted, probably for 2 reasons. One, for it not being human-like in appearance, so that it avoided the violence towards humans censoring guidelines, and 2, that the Tank being on fire is a crucial aspect of the game. Having a visual depiction of him being set aflame is kinda necessary for, fighting against the Tank in each game, so it was kept in. The Hunter was also unchanged from what we saw at launch, minus the fact that before the passing update, his initial pounce damage acted in line with how the Jockey's grab worked. What that means is that the Hunter didn't need to leap and could simply just fall straight down off of high places and land on a survivor to both pounce them and deal up to 25 pounce damage at once, negating his trademark sound and being a silent drop. The Smoker had no alterations during the change, but I just wanted to bring up something I missed in the first video. Here is some concept art of him. While some look like rejected offers for Last of Us clickers, A Quiet Place Death Angels, Dying Light Volatiles, and miscellaneous Resident Evil beasts, I just can't help but notice that 2 of his solo arts really focused on a particular part of the Smoker's anatomy. Like, dang, I heard smoking stunts your growth.
Hey, homie, I can see your doodle.
Shut up, Flanders.
Really focused on them tentacles, but dang, dude, can you imagine if we had Smoker Dong just barely plopping around? The great sequel, Migration, saw the Boomer finding love in his Boomette. As stated with the Spitter, the Boomer may have not found his female counterpart if it had not been for the fat version of our toxic gal, the Spitter's concept art. Although the Boomette's concept art is slightly different, as she was originally going to have way more pronounced eyeballs just kind of poking out, and she would have had the Harley-Davidson motorcycle's logo on her shirt. For obvious reasons, this was cut either due to Harley-Davidson flat out rejecting that being included in the game, or Valve simply avoiding a lawsuit from the major motorcycle company. They don't want to insinuate that all their biker chicks look like that.
Fat bottom girls, you make the rockin' world go round. I'm different, yeah, I'm different. I'm different.
Now, there are the uncommon infected that have unique attributes dependent on their clothing and environment to spice up the gameplay. Before the release of the passing campaign, the fallen survivor was doomed to be stuck in limbo, only accessible through the developer console. Playtesting showed that his mechanics proved to be way too janky and explosive for players, not purely for the fact that he ran away from the survivors when harmed, but because he had prior features that were deleted once the first DLC came roaring by. His mere presence made everything way too hectic and unpredictable, and not in a fun way. Since the lore behind him is that he was a former doomsday prepper, his litany of supplies on him would be active at all times on his chest, meaning if you killed him with a bullet to his torso, the Molotov on his vest would immediately ignite and even summon a horde. This was cause of great concern, as a common being shot caused a big radius of fire on the spot that could have been instant doom for players, especially on higher difficulties. Fire does a lot of damage. This could also have been a pain in the ass on versus, as an unopportune fallen survivor being nearby could have you easily caught off guard and on fire as an infected without you even knowing it before it's too late. You would have to keep track of the commons that are near you. On top of that, a game-breaking bug could occur when he dropped what was an invisible item on the ground when dead. If you picked this up, your primary weapon would basically be deleted and the icon for it in your inventory replaced with a miscellaneous throwable or healing item, but you could not use them, effectively forcing you to only use your secondary weapon. Hell, sometimes killing the fallen survivor would just flat out crash your game. Now, it's possible that he was planned to be included in the Swamp Fever campaign, as he is seen right here running towards the plantation house in the opening cinematic, but due to his laundry list of issues, he had to be cut. But I think it's just to add more variety in the commons in the opening cinematic. Another similar blunder Easter egg can be noted in the same intro cinematic, where a riot cop infected is seen taking Ellis's gun away from him in the elevator to the dead center finale. Probably just to showcase more uncommons in the intro, since the Parish doesn't pop up enough with the uncommons, and that this also shows the dead center map at night. Since there was the whole concept of they were doing campaigns at day and night instead of just dusk, dawn, and night that were introduced for Left 4 Dead 2, it's possible Dead Center may have originally been conceived as a night map. But this is probably not it, just reading into it too much, and this was probably just made dark for entertainment purposes to make it more spooky. Also, another small Easter egg in the fact that the cop is able to yoink Ellis's gun before he gets in the elevator. This may be a nod to the scrapped mechanic from the Left 4 Dead Alpha days, where the devs debated on if a survivor would be able to drop their main weapon due to being pinned. Now, the Mudman, Clown, Seed Agent, and the Riot Cop are all largely unchanged throughout their whole concept phase. Unless you were in Germany and Australia, where the Riot Cop just plain was not a part of the game. He just popped out of existence for years due to censorship regulations mandating that violence against law enforcement officials was prohibited, even though they actually were not police, but just run-of-the-mill rent-a-cops. The worker Uncommon Infected is also fun to note because he is the only Uncommon Infected that has no unique dialogue or voice lines from the survivors directed towards it. Why this construction worker isn't specifically noted by Coach Ellis, Rochelle, or Nick is unknown. Maybe Valve forgot to get some recorded lines for him, or maybe mentioning the thing was just cut early on. Maybe Valve figured that the survivors wouldn't take notice of their earmuffs and connect the dots that pipe bombs and unintentionally bile bombs did not distract them, so it made it more of a surprise for players that would not know that the pipe bomb could not be affecting them. But that's it for the infected included or revised up to release. But what about those that shared the same fate as Left 4 Dead 1's Screamer, that had been left behind during the concept and development phases? The tank has held a solitary title in all of Left 4 Dead's history as its only boss infected, being the meaty champion of the Green Flu. But for a short time, Valve batted around the idea of an alternate boss infected being available to spawn in the same manner as the tank, known famously as the Meatwall. Not much is known behind the behemoth except for his concept art where he has this sheer girth and the fact that 2 common infected are seemingly either fused into his arms or are constantly being held by him like ragdolls. Maybe he had the option to pick up common infected lying around nearby or who are walking by and just yeet them like a tank boulder. Who knows? What a new boss infected of this stature could do that the tank couldn't already is up to interpretation. Probably a slower, bulkier, and more resilient variant of the tank. But working around 2 bosses that would have to determine who would take precedence in being spawned in, and making a boss infected that was not rapidly pursuing the survivors because that thing has got to be slow as hell. That would be terrifying if it had a 28 days later pace, but it probably did not fit the dynamic that Valve was going for, so the wall of meat was torn down and scrapped for chunky parts. The Spitter was supposedly a completely different person before we knew her, in regards to gender, build, and even the kind of gross vile assortment of things gathered in their stomach and profused out the mouth, channeling her inner Pied Piper as the Ratman, working fundamentally the same as her, but instead of highly corrosive stomach acid, it was basically the rat summoning power from Dishonored, maybe having had its rats act like the acid and dealing residual damage to any survivor that was within their radius, but maybe even further, as if this swarm of rats would slowly follow nearby survivors until eventually fading away, like a movable acid puddle. The devs referred to these rodents as both vermin and verminades, kind of making me think of Vermintide there. However, just like the Hell Hog that we have mentioned multiple times, having infected animals was just not something that would stick for the Green Flu virus.
Fuck yeah!
Absolutely favorite this.
Valve felt like it just had to be with humans, sticking only to Homo sapiens and leaving these concepts on the drawing board permanently. Now the Spitter has yet another lasting legacy with a little bit of Boomer in between, as the only really scrapped special infected that made it to the in-game gameplay concept phase was a fella by the name of the Leaker. Chet Falasek has said in interviews and himself that they had programmed a special infected that would act as pretty much an infected landmine, similar to the Boomer, maybe even reconstituting how the Boomer's explosion used to do damage. It would spew goo and choose locations in which to plant itself. Once survivors drew near it, it would explode, causing large damage. But as with all special infected, he would have had audible music cues that gave away his intentions, being easily avoidable in situations or attempting to block pathways only to be easily shot. I could possibly have seen this as a non-playable special infected, much like the Witch just spawning in the map, but definitely not being a useful or even entertaining or fun special infected to play as in versus. Having to panic spawn in and hope the survivors draw close enough, just that ain't it. And yet it would be plagued with the same problems of unavoidable explosion damage like the Boomer during testing for Left 4 Dead 1. Turtle Rock may have reused some of this idea when they were making their ridden called the Sleeper, where it plants itself somewhere in the map and then automatically pins anyone that draws near. So basically replace the Boomer explosion with the Hunter Pounce. But you know what? Fuck that mechanic, by the way. I hated that thing. While the Leaker was explored and even play tested early on, there was never a model or concept art of the creature made. They figured it wasn't worth making anything art-wise or design-wise if they figured out that the special wasn't fun or going to be moving forward into the game. I had almost forgotten to include more scrapped infected. For years, there was a design that people assumed would have been its own special infected, dubbed by the community as Claws. But in recent years, Peter Koenig has come out with his concept art and stating that this design was one of many concepts that didn't get far, if at all, for the Charger, listing the Claws design as a nonsensical one for the Charger since its main character feature, its physical trait, was longer fingers, something the Charger would have no relation with or need to mutate its body into to carry out its attack method. It needs a big strong arm, not little lanky fingers. Leave that to the witch. So that was the many occlusions of infected big and small, and survivors large and tall. But what about the world in which they will roam in, to slaughter and maim within? Unlike Left 4 Dead 1, where entire campaigns were omitted or went through rigorous changes up to release, the 5 campaigns of Left 4 Dead were relatively built solid since their conception, except for a little bit of seasoning here and there, or one that we'll get into in a bit. Dead Center, for one, did not see a lot of difference, ignoring the riot cop in the opening cinematic as definitive proof that he was conceived for the campaign, which was never confirmed. The only real omission for Dead Center and change was with the gun-toting store owner, Whitaker. He now just waits patiently for you to Uber Eats him the conveniently only item left in the market, being cola, so he could shoot the truck with a rocket to blow it up. It was originally to be that he would have actually helped the foursome from his perch, shooting the infected with some kind of assault rifle or sniper, kind of as a temporary 5th survivor. This idea was eventually carried over to the passing, where the 3 OG survivors would provide covering fire to the second group at the bridge as they gathered gas cans for the generator. It makes more sense in the context of the passing to have support over the generator while they bring in gas cans, versus a rectangular map in 3 separate layers with a closed off building having one guy picking off infected the whole time. While it would have been cool to have Whitaker do all these, it just never happened. The proof is in the pudding too, because there are sound files in the game that remain from Whitaker's shooting days.
Climb that, you green-skinned son of a bitch!
Dark Carnival mostly had different spawns for tier 2 weapons here and there, from spawns on chapter 1 all over the map to an extra 3rd tier 2 weapon in the room right before the drop off to the carousel event. It's when we get to the entertainment sections of the park that things start to show some difference from conception. The roller coaster section of the carnival had originally been intended to have a survival map counterpart on release, as proven through exploits where players reached the chapter that it's housed within through regular survival chapters if you do the grenade launcher jump glitch. Once reaching there and turning on the roller coaster, specific spawns for supplies along the coaster that are never there in campaign or versus proves this point. While it is a neat idea to use the coaster as a survival map, the limited amount of survival maps in the game and the coaster's crescendo designed pathing and multiple high points would not really fit for what survival is going for. Long-term holdouts in a condensed part of a map, especially since half of the coaster is cut off once you drop down at that one specific point. Of course, that could have been rectified by putting a ladder on the coaster or simply being able to walk back up it, but it still would just not have been entertaining to try and achieve decent times on, so it was cut. The finale of the concert would remain its loud, bombastic, rock-hard, but largely bland map style till execution, except for how you escaped the carnival originally. Instead of using the pyrotechnics to signal a chopper to come and get you, you would have instead taken a train to get away. In an interview that NF had with the Valve level designers, they stated this: the original escape vehicle for Dark Carnival was a train. There's even some voice lines for a train escape in the game's files, but it was later changed to a bus and eventually to a helicopter, because the devs felt the layout didn't make much sense for the train or bus. This would make more logistical sense and give more weight to the survivors starting Swamp Fever in the middle of a wrecked train car instead of ending up in one with the crashed helicopter just kinda haphazardly thrown behind it, especially since that helicopter is just the Channel 5 news helicopter from No Mercy. The idea of a train at the Dark Carnival finale would return in the fan-made custom campaign campaign Dark Carnival Remix, where following one of the tracks from the original Chapter 3 would be a part of the crescendo event leading to the finale. Furthermore, on the Left 4 Dead 2 Reddit, user L4D2NF hosted a Q&A with some devs leading up to the release of Dark Carnival Remix to get some ideas to make the campaign more like it was conceptualized and to expand on the gameplay and styles for this fan-made campaign. Two Valve devs came out to say this. The original finale was supposed to be a train. You could see you arrive in a train boxcar at the beginning of Swamp Fever, but I think we felt it didn't feel like it really tied into the carnival type setting, and Valve Dev 2 wanted to do the concert. If I remember correctly, there was supposed to be a guy in the concert area who was going to help you with the stage lights and sound. He was going to be up in the audience area at the back, and you would have to ask him to be your tech crew. It was later changed to turn it on yourselves. The second dev would expand on this statement. The stage finale originally had you move about the stadium to switch banks in the bleachers, but we cut it back to just defending the stage. I wanted to keep the players moving rather than sticking to the stage. I eventually pulled this off by placing items around the arena. This might have been when the tech guy was written in, but I'm not sure. The train departure was cut in favor of the helicopter rescue from the stadium. As far as I can remember, the train rescue was going to involve a train showing up behind a fence and the team jumping on when it arrived. It was tougher spatially to pull this off from the stage because we wanted to keep the experience more contained. Much easier to make a chopper fly in over the walls that kept you inside the stadium. So basically what they're saying is, instead of finagling with a random tech guy that stayed behind from the concert, having the survivors do everything themselves made it more dynamic and forced more movement while making the world feel more apocalyptic, like there is less people. And to make the vehicle come to you instead of figuring out how to make a train that goes out into the bayous of Louisiana all the way from a carnival makes sense. Connecting to the swamp though, the murky depths of the campaign stayed pretty stagnant from little to no change. The cinematic trailer has people always mentioning the fallen survivors' inclusion and the turret being on the first floor instead of the second, but these are more than likely just changes to make the split-second action shots that show up for like less than 2 seconds more interesting and diverse. But what was an idea for the middle child of a campaign was the fact that some of the wooden walkways that you have to go across could break randomly, causing you to fall to the shallow water and land below, probably playing into the RNG-driven director changing the map on each playthrough. But the unpredictability of rickety planks snapping without knowing which could do so would have made it so much more irritating. The only notes of this idea comes from a small snippet from the official Xbox magazine back in August of 2009, just a few months before Left 4 Dead 2's release. Thank God that didn't make it through, because just the slow movement in water makes a lot of people hate Swamp Fever for that reason. So if you were to make it to where the only bridges could snap and make you fall down, that would have sealed the deal for making it one of the least favorite campaigns for a lot of people. Hard Rain saw some ease in its beginning, where weapons would originally not spawn in the burger tank, but instead much later in the chapter, making it more difficult for players to get through the map, in contrast to Dead Center's first chapter, where you only had secondary weapons for the first half until you got through the elevator. But it makes sense there because the close spaces of the hotel's hallways made it manageable to work with those weapons, versus Hard Rain's open streets and rooftops where infected can come from any angle. Since the campaign itself is one that you do make a return visit through each part of the map, there was an idea to literally light your way back home. According to Chet Falasek at Eurogamer Expo London, there was a mechanic of flipping on lights in buildings and streets on the way to the gas station to brighten your return visit through the torrential and dark rain so it may be more illuminated. Honestly though, it wasn't really necessary and would largely just be so inconsequential to put the time and effort into, especially with the flow of the campaign, that it was scrapped. There was no point in just flipping on lights, so they just made it mandatory for the lights to be on. Other scrapped mechanics for for Hard Rain would have entailed the survivors using flares to signal Virgil to return to pick them up from the dock. This was changed to something more in line with how Left 4 Dead survivors do things by turning on the burger tank sign, just doing something so outlandish instead of something so simple. While the flares were removed, it's most likely a playful reference when you start up the Hard Rain campaign, where the survivors bicker with each other over who forgot the flares in the gun bag.
What are we supposed to signal them with?
Oh, there's flares in the gun bag.
What gun bag? Oh, fuck. Tell me we didn't forget the guns.
The gas station's right across the street. Let's just get the gas and then we'll figure out how to signal Virgil.
Now, the common infected populating the areas of Hard Rain also had different visuals to them exclusive to the campaign to show how saturated from the heavy rain the infected were, but it was scrapped due to the vapid nature of how the maps change on your return visit. It would not make sense for the infected to be soaking wet when you first go through parts of the map. These renditions of the commons can be easily reinstated through workshop mods. Leaving the rain behind, the Parish, the basically center stage of levels for Left 4 Dead 2 in New Orleans, saw a decent amount of revisions. Most notably were that Chapter 1 and 2 would have all just been one very long chapter from the dock all the way till after the bus station crescendo event. Devs found it to be a bit too long for most players. This may be why the area right after the park has an abundance of medkits and healing items, a compensation for that long road. You can still access this version of the map by typing map C5M1_waterfront_SNDscape in the console commands. Another thing of note in regards to the crescendo event were changes to the beginning, middle, and end of it. The original CETA truck in which you entered to start was going to just be a regular military tent with decontamination showers sprinkling survivors before going in and out. The same showers can be seen if you clip through the map, being active in the bus station when the alarm has been turned off. To add more flavor to this being a quarantine zone, they were rallying people in here and trying to stop the infection, so they had to sanitize. Also of note is that the alarm sounded like it was straight out of Kill Bill. I mean, listen to this.
Oh, now the Charger's beating on me. Alright.
Way more jarring and honestly grating to hear and deal with, adding more stress and pressure. Sure, it's a horror game and it's hectic. You can think that would add a little spice to the souffle of the undead, but it would become annoying to deal with, especially on repeat playthroughs where you would probably consistently die at higher difficulties. So it was changed to a lower toned repeating sound so that the high-pitched attacks of the infected would be more discernible. The Parish also had a different music theme for when hordes were summoned by the AI director. What we currently have sounds like this. An arrangement of a variety of instruments popular in New Orleans, the birthplace of jazz music, so it makes sense. But originally, the score would have sounded more southern encompassing, to say the least. What does that mean? Here, give it a listen. Whether or not that would have been better or worse, I'll leave that up to you. Now, the famous park in which you have 3 options to pick a path between was originally devised as a rather elaborate, procedurally generated maze for players to navigate. But the advent of trying to figure your way through a labyrinth in the environment of Left 4 Dead 2's playstyle just made it more frustrating for players where resources and health are limited, and where the AI director would punish you for dawdling in a specific area for too long. If you got lost in the maze, the AI director would be like, they're just screwing around. Let's throw some zombies their way.
Playtesters found the paths confusing. When we removed the dynamic objects that forced survivors to go in certain directions, we found that having all paths open led to a better experience. Players still spend a lot of time in the park, but they could choose to go different ways every time they played the level.
but the idea of a procedurally generated area would be slightly tweaked and then used for the campaign version of the cemetery later on in the campaign, where 4 different possible pathways exist for the dead area.
Something that was always sad for us to watch in Left 4 Dead was that players would always choose an optimized path through a level once they played the map a couple times. So one thing we wanted to add in Left 4 Dead 2 was the ability for the AI director to change the path of the survivors through a level, so they have to take a different path each time.
The final stretch of the series, being the Memorial Bridge, would have been a bit different as well. Instead of calling the military for pickup, you would instead be in contact with someone named Lieutenant Maverick, who would be making emergency repairs on the rescue chopper you would be going to, giving the survivors a 15-minute timer on the screen that needs to be beat, lest they be left for dead.
Rescue 7, what is your repair status? Over. Repair ETA is 10 minutes, over. Copy that. All lambs extracted. Last buzzard starts run in 15 minutes. Copy that. Over.
But a timer of that length was plenty of time, and adding a timer to a crescendo event where you're already going to be rushing didn't fit with what they were doing. Timers are largely reserved to survival and survival type finales, even though you can't see them. The timer would also have been less strenuous, as the dev stated that the original bridge finale would have had no vehicles whatsoever dotting the concrete mass. Just a long, boring stretch of running across the bridge with some holes and some tiered levels that you went up and down between. Having cars populate the bridge made it feel like more people were attempting to evacuate and were overwhelmed. Kind of like that Walking Dead scene with Rick going towards Atlanta and seeing all the cars on the other side of the highway. It gives that visual storytelling that Left 4 Dead has always been exceptional at. So we got the people, the zombies, and the world they are in. But what about what those people are wielding to kill the infected, to survive, and to help them give an edge to survive? Well, weapons and supplies saw some minor changes here and there. But before that, what is most fascinating were some cut melee weapons, being the riot shield and the didgeridoo. Shield being fully completed down to its motions and texture, but still omitted and contained purely in console commands and usable in expanded community mods. Most likely axed, since the police baton was already in game and much less disruptive to a survivor's vision compared to the riot shield, especially since the stick is an actual melee weapon while the shield is, well, a shield. Less flashy in execution, being a blunt rectangle that could only do so much, begging the questions of why survivors didn't just carry both the shield and the stick. But then we're getting into the question of gameplay versus logistics. Ultimately, the shield makes less sense for a fun melee weapon that feels good to hit zombies with. On the opposite end of the spectrum, we have
Didgeridoo. That seems very noisy and expensive for a souvenir.
Bare bones modeling of a didgeridoo, a wind instrument made by northern Aborigines in Australia over 1,000 years ago, exists in the game, but nothing else came of it, as it was probably dropped early on in its own creation. My theory as to why this even exists in the first place is that since Australia faced censorship, that Valve was whipping up an exclusive melee weapon to Aussie gamers to compensate the lack of blood and violence, since instruments like that would have no business being plentiful in the American South, although if you think about it, katanas and cricket bats are too, but chalk those up to weebs and Shaun of the Dead references respectively. The wooden music device was probably axed in favor of importing Counter-Strike weapons instead to save on limited dev time, since the game had less than a year in the oven. Melees weren't the only weapons going to the scrapyard though. Files indicate that both a flare gun and a law rocket launcher were both to be usable by the survivors, but I would say that these both serve as titles used for weapons intended to not be usable by players, but by NPCs and map mechanics, with the flare being a part of the scrap version of Hard Rain's finale, and the rocket launcher being what Whitaker uses to clear the way in Dead Center. Plus, we have the grenade launcher as a special weapon, so it would be a bit redundant to include include another long-range explosive gun. Early development also saw concept sketches with our boy Coach wielding a compound bow. Nothing else really came of that, with nothing in developer commentary or files to hint at that weapon's inclusion. My guess would be that a bow and arrow weapon wouldn't serve well in the environment of Left 4 Dead as it would in other games. The weapon is more of a stealthy, slow-loading, and singular target-focused weapon. None of these fit with the Horde shooter, where infected automatically already know where you are at most times anyways, especially special infected. They auto-lock onto you. But if you want a bow and arrow experience of shooting once and then taking forever to make the next shot, just go pick the op. But what about weapons in the final release? And how were they during testing, and how could they have been? For the firearms that carried over from 1 to 2, not much really changed about them. Early test builds just had the same look, feel, sound, and damage output as they were in Left 4 Dead 1. The hunting rifle, combat shotgun, pump shotgun, Uzi, and M16 followed this. For the new assortment, things had some tweaks. The AK-47 originally had a faster fire rate. The SCAR combat rifle was fully automatic in a 50-round mag instead of the 3-round bursts in a 60-round mag we got today. The silenced SMG and its strap have jiggle physics that were eventually restored in the Last Dead update. The Desert Eagle Magnum was originally going to be referred to as the Desert Cobra. Signage at Whitaker's gun shop reflects this snaky originality, probably choosing to call it the Desert Eagle to keep it more patriotic since this is set in the US. While our guns weren't changed all that much, the melee weapons are where we got the change sauce.
Ask me a question. I dare you.
The basically favorite melee weapon of the dev team, the fire axe, had 2 major cuts. Pun intended. One was a downward swing animation that it originally had. That was cut because, well, we've played with the pitchfork since the Last Stand update. We've had 5 years to goof with that. It uses a vertical swing, and a vertical swing is wildly less effective compared to a horizontal one when dealing with the infected, especially in large numbers. You just have a wider net in which to cut them. The fire axe also apparently had the ability to decapitate the witch if you hit it just right, like crowning her but with more headway. Much like the curb stomp mechanic I'll be discussing in a bit, being able to kill the witch in this manner required less finesse than the crowning kind of mechanic. It also probably was cut to reduce dev time in modeling a headless witch, since in most, if not all cases of Left 4 Dead 2 at launch, special infected never have their models modified by damage in any way, minus some blood from bullets. The crowbar was apparently going to have a faster swing, similar to the rates of the machete and police baton, but that never came to be. The GameStop pre-order of the baseball bat was intended to be made of metal instead of wood, with some sound effects still there in old trailers. It and the cricket bat also retained the same wonky downward animations the axe had. Same reason on why those were cut, and the same with the frying pan. There was a lot of downward animations, and Valve figured out people didn't really like that. Here's a hint on the Last Stand stuff. Just make the pitchfork not do that anymore.
She loves it. She's going for it.
Whoa!
What the hell are you doing?
You can't throw art in the trash.
Oh, that wasn't art, it was garbage.
Ha! Got him!
The Bile Bomb was originally going to be a neutral faction grenade. What does that mean? Well, if you were to hit a fellow survivor with your Bile Bomb, they would be biled as well. This was most likely changed to both alleviate frustrations of accidentally hitting teammates in the fast-paced environment of Left 4 Dead, and to nip that griefing in the bud. It is just common sense with how online games are that people are going to screw with you. Friendly fire bile bombs would have been the bane of many random online gaming experiences. Lord knows I would be the one Nickelodeon sliming my friends at any given opportunity every time I got that bile bomb, so I am glad they did not incorporate it.
Jesus! Boomer files that tanks!
I do.
So retarded!
Back to melee weapons just one last time before we go into a mystery grab bag of Left 4 Dead 2 changes that never made it to launch. There was also going to be the ability to dual wield melee weapons. Yeah, that's right, you could like have a machete in one hand and a katana in the other, but however, it proved to be too finicky to work with. They had a few play tests with it and figured out it just wasn't worth it. Much like after Halo 2 and 3, the devs didn't really see a point in dual wielding weapons when one got the job done with less visual clutter on screen. Yeah, it looks cool, but the luster would run off pretty quickly. Melee weapons also were going to be like Dead Rising, where they would eventually break after enough use. Taking a breath of the wild, Valve decided it just wasn't fun to manage melee weapons in this way. Where guns, you could see how much ammo you had left, so you could at least replenish what you had or get a new gun. Melee weapons breaking relied on sound alone in the midst of all the other sounds going on that you would have to micromanage. It would have just been annoying. You could play mods to bring this mechanic back, and some people may believe this is superior, but it would not have been good in the environment of Left 4 Dead. I know I've said that chain of words a lot, but that is the case. But what some people believe are good can go where Uncle Eddie lets out his shitter.
Shitter was full!
Now, to the miscellaneous section of the video, there were plans and even coding implemented into the launch version of the game that saw the survivors stomping the heads of infected to finish them off. Leftover files can be easily accessed to achieve this through SV cheats. If you were to shove in a lone infected, you would insta-kill them American History X style. This supposed curb stomp could even be capable of killing the witch with a single Grand Theft Auto Goomba stomp. While the idea of a whole different third-person animation, yes, it would put you in a third-person animation of killing the infected sounds and may even look cool, it would be way too disruptive to the flow of the game. Suddenly stopping on a dime to Gallagher a zombie's head open with your foot would not work. It would leave you wide open to being hit by all sorts of threats in the midst of this sequence. You would be locked into that animation. Not only that, but it's very easy to dramatize how annoying and clunky the execution would be. Shoving a singular infected would trigger the animation that could easily and accidentally screw you over. Here's an example. You're trying to run from a group of infected, or maybe there is a charger or jockey running after you. You try to shove one common away that's ahead of you, only for you to get locked into the stomping sequence and the other infected catching up to you to either pin you down or start wailing on you, especially since it could trigger even if you weren't within distance to hit them. You would basically magnetize to your target, much like a survivor does to a pallet in Dead by Daylight. On the topic of survivors acting somewhat like Dead by Daylight skins, survivors, there's no real difference between characters in that game. Apparently, the idea of crawling on the ground while incapacitated was set to return from the scrapped concept days of Left 4 Dead 1. The same method of accessing the crawling mechanic and the fact that there were 4 unique crawling animations for the 4 new survivors are within the files as well. Redacted like the US government's attempt at the Epstein files, where you can access it all just by easily typing in a few commands. Just like its predecessor, this crawling mechanic was probably scrapped once again to make the dying state more critical and more reliant on teamwork. In order to keep downed people in one place waiting on help, and to also not make it easier for survivors to get themselves out of dangerous situations that either the infected may have put them in or the survivors put themselves in reference to people getting stuck with where they put themselves in, PlayStation has no frickin' games. While it probably did not last long in the development talks and phases, when EA was publishing Left 4 Dead 2 and listing it on their website, some information had come out assuming that the sequel would be coming to the PlayStation 3 console. This was all that ever came of it and was most likely kept to Xbox and PC due to Valve and specifically Gabe Newell's good relationship with Microsoft for many years at that point.
So that's what I get for working at Microsoft.
On the topic of Microsoft, funnily enough, when it came to people digging into websites for any nuggets of information pertaining to Left 4 Dead 2, data miners discovered that there was something labeled as both a Miracle Pack and an Apocalypse Pack. People assumed that these two names were editions of Left 4 Dead 2 that you could get at launch. Hell, it's common practice for games to have multiple different versions at release with different content that you would get. Maybe different skins or something, although that wasn't really commonplace in major gamer releases at the time, not to the capacity that it is today. Regardless, these code names had nothing to do with the game for launch or editions. Chet Falasek came out to say that these files were simply titles for testing code for certification to bring Left 4 Dead to Microsoft and Xbox. It was just a part of the process of bringing the game to a different console. So no, there wasn't going to be DLC depending on the kind of edition you would get, so no coach in a football uniform or Nick in a prison suit as a pre-order bonus. Although we did get a baseball bat if you pre-ordered with GameStop. As kind of lame as the baseball bat was as a pre-order bonus, do you remember that super well animated commercial just to promote that?
Looks like the team is getting together for a little powwow.
Yeah, they're in a real jam here, Skipper.
You said it. Their opponents tonight are a real hungry bunch.
Their intensity is infectious.
Well, it appears the coach has a plan. Here's the pitch. Swung on. Oh, boy.
That's a home run.
Pre-order Left 4 Dead 2 at GameStop and get an exclusive in-game baseball bat. Power to the players. Rated M for mature.
That shit was lit! I will say Back 4 Blood must have done what they love to do and reuse scrapped concepts for Left 4 Dead that should not have been making it to the game, but this time repurposing that incorrect pack idea into additions for Back 4 Blood. And we all know how that went. $100 for the Ultimate Edition. What was I thinking? While there are a few minor things I skimmed over, like how the adrenaline used to look like a bottle of pills but yellow and the defib just being the medkit but with a lightning bolt on it, placeholders aren't really cut content, they're just there temporarily, as is a bunch more that I may have omitted. Left 4 Dead 2 saw quite a lot of differences in the short development span that originally spurred from ideas that Valve and Turtle Rock wanted to implement as DLC for the original Left 4 Dead, going through rigorous testing into what would be fun for the special infected to go as and against, what survivors worked as in appearance, voice, and most importantly, personality-wise. How when it comes to map changes, even if you want new ideas to be reflected on them, need to be shown with some restraint. How different everything could have looked and feeled just from a lot of these differences, and how things go from concept to reality. From 2005 sketches and a litany of different looking zombies to what we have today. And I think what we got in the end turned out to be purely perfect and refined byproducts of the perfect zombie horde shooter experience that has only been solidified in people's minds for a decade and a half now. We might talk trash about it from time to time. Hey, it's still relevant after all this time, and that's not even including all the mods. It's just a good base game, and there was a lot that went into it. So Left 4 Dead 2 would have looked a lot different if they just kept a lot of the designs, and why things had to change so much. That about wraps up this exhaustive look into what Left 4 Dead 2 could have been, and let me just say this was probably the biggest video I've worked on since the entire story of Left 4 Dead 2, I guess. It's funny because the first Left 4 Dead 1 video I did of this nature was shorter, and I was assuming Left 4 Dead 2 wouldn't be as long, but there was a lot more to sink my teeth into. It's kind of like how I did the stories with the I Guess series, but I'm digressing. Thank you so much for watching, and for Jays helping me out in getting some information right, to Walker's Films and Dark Games, aka Duka Gumby, for their incredible animation talents, and so many more animators throughout Left 4 Dead history that I have credited throughout the video. You guys have made what Left 4 Dead is today. If you would like to see the cut content of all of Left 4 Dead's DLCs and content updates from Crash Course, the original Last Stand, The Passing, The Sacrifice, Coldstream, and then the community-made Last Stand update, let me know down below. Were there things I got wrong or or did not bring up throughout the video, you know what to do. Go in the comments, complain, or correct me. I would love to see it. I mean, I made a couple of mistakes in the first video. Support the channel and our efforts by donating on my Patreon and becoming a patron to see my videos up to a week early. Do that, or become a YouTube channel member, or donate during my weekly live streams of Left 4 Dead 2 with fans on my second channel, WSG Streams, to have your name featured here. Shout out to all my supporters on this list for keeping me motivated after all these years and keeping me afloat during these economically turbulent times. Thank you to director level donators that have donated over 50 and have just donated for a long time. My old friend Blue Guy, GG Dog, Darkness Now, Zombie 316 or 316, Sammy /Gonplay, Osprey Emblem, Peter Pranker, Telone Ninja Roach, Sammy A 1999, and my boy NATO. Then we have our tank in which Patreon donators, Aura Drags, Millie Cat, Terran X, Blaine Roy, Hikaru Narukami, Malipucci, Starlight Twist, Susan Huff, Daniel Harris, and Soltaire. Then we have our special infected YouTube memberships. You can become a member today, just like Generally Soldier, Jervis Wilson, Navukal, Sean Norris, Yes _Daddy _808. I put underscore there because I did not want to say your name in succession very quickly, and Wendell from BBB. And we just got a few common infected live stream donators in Nestamac, and Mao. And a big thank you to you for watching my stupid little videos for almost 10 years now. Oh, that's right. Coming this May will be the 10th anniversary of Wowsuch Gaming, of this channel beginning May 3rd, 2016. Man, time sure does fly talking about Left 4 Dead, zombies, post-apocalypses, talking about how stupid people are, and more. It has been a hell of a journey from doing all of this in a little studio at my radio station and at my mom's house to an apartment with my best friend.
You don't want to play an Elder Scrolls game? Come on, man.
No, I don't. Not this one.
To every device.
Why not?
It's on phone.
Phones,
Fuck no.
PCs.
But you do everything on your phone.
Why would you want to play a game in fucking portrait mode?
On mobile.
Read off on it while you fucking play Elder Scrolls?
To my own home that I was able to get through YouTube and living with my girlfriend and her son. I love them both so much. Anyways, before I start getting all sentimental, thank you again for watching. And until next time, I'm Zackass, aka Wowsuch Gaming. Never forget to stay happy, stay healthy, pray harder, and most importantly, stay wow.